So now we're gonna look at we just looked at what complex carbohydrate is. We looked at the effects of soluble and insoluble fiber. Now we're gonna see how much fiber do we need, okay? And basically the amount of fiber that we need is an adequate intake of about 25 grams to about 38 grams, okay? And the goal is to have about 14 grams for about 1,000 calorie diet. So the daily value, on the other hand, about 28 grams for a 2000 kcal diet, but the average intake is only about 15 grams. And kind of looking at the statistics in America, more than 90% of women and 97% of men do not meet their recommended needs. So of course we know we have to increase our fiber, but a lot of times people sometimes, a lot of health, people who are really interested in health, they might go a little bit overboard and consume way too much fiber. And that's something to kind of remember that particularly for toddlers, and if they're consuming a lot of a lot of fiber, especially if they're on a strict vegetarian diet, so, all plant-based, no animals. Yes, a vegetarian diet can be really healthy for adults. More on this, that I'll discuss later on. But for very young children, it's almost impossible to do a very strict vegetarian diet without serious health effects. Because, for example, you are getting the biggest problem is the pound per pound basis, it has a very high calorie and vitamin and mineral needs. But the toddlers basically have very, very small stomach capacity. So a toddler fed only a plant-based food, which is quite fiber rich. The fiber fills their stomachs in no time, looking at a gel formation, and that fiber water gel complex that fills them up, that you can't get enough calories, minerals, vitamins into their needs. And so, it's this disease that we call like failure to thrive. And there was a case back at home in Malaysia, a 4-year-old boy, a height and weight of a 2-year-old boy, because he wasn't getting enough of the calories and vitamins and minerals that were needed for normal growth. Also, when we talk about too much fiber, and remember that, if when you're consuming fiber, it absorbs water. So if you're having a lot more fiber, you really need to increase your water intake, or then you're going to have really very, very hard stools. And it also might decrease some of your minerals because, again, your minerals are kind of tied in together with your fiber. So, you want to, you do not want to take excessive amounts of fibers, just following the daily value, or at least getting anywhere from about 25 to about 35 grams of fiber basically is just what is needed. So, we want to kind of, especially if you're talking about young kids and you want to go on a very strict vegetarian diet, it's best to kind of consult with a pediatrician or a registered dietitian to make sure that they're getting for all their nutrients needed for healthy growth and development. So coming back to this day where we talk about juicing, and juicing has become really popular way to consume fruits and vegetables because it's a fun way to drink your vegetables or fruits without having to eat them. Also a smart way to kind of get your vitamins and minerals, especially if you have, gas cramping from eating too much fiber-rich food. And the good news is that most of your vitamins and minerals and your phytochemicals remain in that juice that is extracted from the fruits and vegetables during the juicing process. Also, you control the amount of added sugars and preservatives if you're making it at home, right? But that's where the problem is. The downside of juicing is that the natural fibers that are found in the fruits, the whole fruits and vegetables are typically lost. But, so juice is not healthier than whole fruit. Um, and in fact, there is no scientific evidence that supports claims that juice extracts provide any health benefits or that nutrients that are better absorbed from juice, okay? Remember that juices, both fruits and vegetables, they contain significant amount of natural sugar, and juicing concentrates that sugar and calories. So if consumed in excess, those calories can quickly add up. So for example, let's say you juice 3 apples and you maybe get 48 grams of sugar, and that's 192 calories. So to make your juice healthier, you need to add some pulp back, and that's where you get that valuable fiber. So, but even better, you can use, these days we have instead of a juicer, you can use an extractor, which kind of pulverizes the fruits and vegetables, and you get that consistency of the juice, but you have that fiber as well that's inside. Okay. So as you can see as well from the picture, we look at the calories inside your orange, and then your calories from your juice. So basically, the fiber also kind of helps you to keep yourself feeling full from eating the whole fruit. So what can we do to kind of increase our fiber intake? Basically, it's impossible for you to suddenly go from like a 15-gram diet all the way to 28. So you want to do that gradually, and you can just kind of increase that 2 to 5 grams per week. Okay. And so any kind of, we know that bacteria kind of digest it. So any kind of, it helps your gut adjust and prevent any form of discomfort. Remember the messages on my plate to kind of make 50% of your grains whole grains, so kind of including legumes and beans and lentils in your meals. Snack on vegetables, whole wheat crackers, and swap ingredients for high fiber, and make sure that you kind of read your labels, okay? Because remember, whole foods are always the best source for fiber. Processed food, a lot of it has been stripped away. So this is kind of review what we've been doing and which of the types of food contain most of the dietary fiber. Is it white bread, celery stick, uh, steak, or your refried beans? And basically, you can remember your white bread is made from refined or enriched white flour. Your celery sticks, it has a bit of fiber, but it's very water dense, so not a lot of the fiber is present. Still a great food, but does not pack a lot of fiber. And then we have your steak. Of course, we know that, animal food does not have any fiber. And so the best option here would be your refried beans, and that's packed with fiber. And so now moving on to the next part, which is whole grains. And kind of looking at whole grains, they always consist, a wheat kernel, basically, the seed from which the wheat plant grows. So basically your whole grains, they are made out of your bran, your germ, and your endosperm. And so when you see over here, your bran is under, the bran is under the husk. The husk is the outermost part. And so when we look over here, you have the bran, which usually will always contain reasonable amounts of vitamin B and minerals. And so we kind of use that for your cereals, or we add it to muffins, bread, and pancakes to add more fiber. We have your endosperm, and the bulk of the grain, and this is what we are typically a lot, familiar with the endosperm. So a bag of white flour is basically pure ground up endosperm. And so when you talk about white bread, it's, particularly that part of the grain. So it contains a lot more starch, okay? And there are some vitamins and minerals. And then finally, we have your germ. And basically the germ, it contains some oils and vitamin E, also contains some trace minerals and some vitamins. And you could buy jars of wheat germ in the grocery store. So people kind of use this on cereals and add that to muffins, bread, pancakes. And it's one of the richest sources of vitamin E. Okay. So if one is eating like, white flour breads, cereals, the germ is gone, and so is the vitamin E. So, that's why we always emphasize eating like whole wheat. So basically, when we talk about, what is whole grain mean, it's, all parts are present except the husk, and all the parts are kind of grounded to make a whole grain flour. And so basically the original fiber, vitamins, and minerals are also kind of present, okay, particularly because the oils or the germs in the whole grain flour and products do not have such a long shelf life. So these oils, basically, they can really get oxidized really very easily, and they can go rancid. So if you kind of remove the germ, the shelf life of that particular product is kind of increased. And so that's why when we talk about refine, we kind of remove the husk, bran, and germ. And so we talk about, like whole grains, and I think they can get rancid a lot more faster. And of course, when you want to make, we a couple of centuries ago, that's when they kind of figured out how to kind of remove the bran to kind of make that light powdery flour that will break up into, croissants, your cakes. But we didn't realize back then that they're kind of destroying the nutrient quality. And the bran that is, where it's fiber rich also gives that really coarse texture that you find in your whole wheat products. So if you want that, fluffy baked goods and everything like that, basically you kind of have to remove that bran, and you kind of have to also kind of remove that germ, and only the endosperm is left present. And that's basically your cereals, cornflakes, white flour, white rice. And basically as well, when we talk about your enriched grains, okay, and so when we talk about, going back to the previous slide, and when we talk about your, white white bread, your white flour, and you kind of remove the husk, the bran, and the germ, you're kind of removing a lot of the fiber and vitamins with it. So what the US and a lot of countries around the world actually kind of mandate is once you create that refined flour and only use the endosperm, you have to add back these vitamins and minerals that have been lost. And this was started out in the 1930s to 1940s, where vitamin B1, B2, B3, which is your thiamine, riboflavin, and niacin, were added back in alongside together with your folate and iron. And we call this your enriched flour, and this is what we can buy. And this is what companies use to make most of their flour-based products, okay? So a white flour, whether it's bleached or unbleached, basically has this enriched, you know, it's basically an enriched flour. And so you can see all these minerals that are kind of been added back. So I just want to kind of take a look at this graph and the nutrient differences between your whole wheat, your enriched, and your refined wheat flour. As you can see, of course, enriched, 5 of these nutrients are kind of added back, so they are present in a lot more compared to your whole wheat flour. But when we look at your whole wheat and your refined flour, we see just the amount of minerals and nutrients are so much significantly a lot more lower. And again, and that's why we want to kind of emphasize when we're talking about eating whole foods, we want to make sure that we try to get 50% of our grains, okay, from whole foods rather than your enriched or your white flour, because they substantially, have a lot more nutrients such as your vitamins and minerals that are present. Another thing that I want to kind of like highlight is this ancient grains. Okay, so ancient grains are basically cereals that have been grains that have been cultivated for thousands of years, and comparing to their modern counterparts, they haven't been subjected to like intensive processing, which often strips away your nutrients and your fibers. So take for example millet, quinoa, amaranth, bulgur, spelt, barley. Okay, they have really high fiber contents. Okay, and so it kind of helps with blood sugar levels, makes you feel longer, gut health. They have a lot more nutrients like proteins, iron, magnesium, zinc, vitamin B. They help with blood sugar control. For people who have gluten allergies, especially, it's a great gluten-free option because your ancient grains, for example, your quinoa, your amaranth, and your millet, they're naturally gluten-free. I'm sorry about that. There's a flight flying by. And so, it's very, very suitable for people who with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity to kind of consume some of these ancient grains. And of course, the flavor and texture. They have that slightly like earthy, nutty flavor, sweet flavor, and also that varied texture. So if you can like, rather than consuming, potatoes or rice, you kind of like modify your meals by kind of using these grains for a main course, you can use that as a salad or as a side dish because they are really very, very high in fiber. So now we move on to our carbohydrate needs. And basically what we can see is that based on your RDAs, we need about 130 grams per day. And this is the minimum. So basically we need 130 grams so that we can, continue on with our body's daily function. And again, we want to limit our amount of sugar. So we want to have, no more than 100 kcals per day for women and not more than 140 kcals for men. And that's basically, 6 teaspoons or 9 teaspoons. And this is the dietary guidelines, and it says to include grains at least half, includes fruits, whole fruits, include a variety of vegetables, and also kind of limit your intake of calories from added sugar to less than 10% grams per day. But kind of remembering again, the kind of food that we eat, we have gone through the different types of carbohydrates, the foods and beverages we consume. We kind of looked at how, complex carbohydrate is also kind of broken down. And to kind of look at that, we also saw that most of people worldwide, not only in America, consume way too much added sugars in their beverages, desserts, and candy, and also refined grain, but not so much, too little fruits, whole grains, beans, beans, and lentils, which are very, very rich in fibers and also your vitamins and your minerals. So what basically happens to glucose in your body? And we know that, after you kind of eat your complex starches, carbohydrate starches, they get broken down into thousands of glucose. And if you eat some of these disaccharides as well, they have to get broken down into the monosaccharides so that you can absorb that back into your blood. So depending on what you eat, you will see whether you have a lot of glucose, fructose, or galactases, okay? Unless you're pregnant and lactating, pretty much all of your galactose gets converted to glucose in your liver. And we know that fructose, as mentioned earlier, has been very, very problematic because fructose gets converted to glucose. And some fructose also gets converted to glycogen, and then that's kind of stored in your and that can be stored as and easily gets converted to fat, which kind of increases your heart disease. So basically what happens to glucose, okay, in your body, basically it helps to satisfy all your energy needs. Okay, remember, it provides ATP, which fuels whatever the cells must do. So if you eat a meal that has more glucose than we need to, it satisfies your immediate energy needs. Okay, and then basically it follows up with number two. Any excess glucose, above meeting your immediate energy needs, will get converted to glycogen and is stored in your liver and muscles. And we can have a limit of how much glycogen we can store. So basically, once you have reached that limit of the amount of glycogen, any excess glucose that's still present will then kind of be stored as fat, okay, in your liver, and then it's transported into your bloodstream and it's stored into your fat cells. So basically, first, you have glucose for your own energy needs, it converts into glycogen, and then it becomes into fat cells if you have any excess. So we have two very, very important hormones, and I want you to kind of do your own reading and watch the videos associated with diabetes. But I want to kind of introduce you to these two hormones, which are insulin and glucagon. And it's maintaining the stable level is very, very crucial for proper health. Okay. So when you eat your blood glucose levels, definitely will rise, as you can see over here. Okay, elevated blood glucose levels. Okay, and so insulin will step in, kind of making sure. And so when you have this elevated glucose level, your pancreas will kind of release your insulin, and so all this excess glucose will then be transported into the cell, converted into glycogen, and then you get this, like, normal blood sugar range. Okay, and we need a stable blood sugar because it's essential for brain function, energy production, and also overall well-being. If you have too much, it will be hyperglycemia, and basically can damage your blood cells and organs. And if it's too low, like here, hypo, it can lead to fatigue, dizziness, and even seizures. So basically, we have insulin that after you eat a meal, it will convert any excess glucose, that sugar spike, to glycogen or fat and store, And then we have your glucagon. So when you have too low, and that is basically your hypoglycemia, basically your body, the pancreas will kind of release out glucagon, and it will break down your glycogen that's stored in your body, okay? And then you can see it will help to normalize your blood sugar. So we need these two hormones to control our blood sugar levels to not prevent us from going into hyper or hypoglycemic glycemia. Okay. And so these are very, very important, especially, people with diabetes, these two hormones. And so the glycemic response, okay, or what we call this glycemic index, it's a tool that can help a person choose healthier food options to help control their blood glucose levels. And so what is glycemic index is basically, it's a scale that helps to rank carbohydrate by how much they rate blood glucose levels in 2 to 3 hours after you consume them. And so to determine the glycemic index of a food item, we must use a reference food. And usually the reference food that we use is either, like mentioned in this graph over here, it's either glucose or white bread. All right. And so usually we will use 50 grams of carbohydrate drops of white bread for a person to eat. And then right before they eat and over the next 2 to 3 hours, we will sample their bloods, okay, to get their blood glucose levels. So you can see the yellow line. Basically this yellow line in the top graph, there is this sharp response, okay, to your to your food intake. So you can see here, right, the time in the minutes, right? So you can see, for example, your glucose and white bread as well, sharp response. And then that, if it's spaghetti in comparison to your glucose and white bread, let me just kind of erase everything so you can see the graphs clearer. I'm sorry, I'm not sure why this about the noise. And so basically, we see that sharp rise in that, in your glycemic response. And we want to determine, let's say we want to determine the glycemic index of spaghetti and pasta. So we can't do it on a different day. And again, they have to eat that 50 grams of spaghetti and pasta, and we take blood samples to kind of determine the blood glucose levels after eating the pasta. So when the same dose of spaghetti is eaten, and you can see that in the red line, okay, you see a modest rise of blood glucose levels. And so mathematically, we can then express the difference in these two graphs as your glycemic index. So in other words, you see that red dashed line has a much more lower blood glucose response than the white bread. So thus the spaghetti has a lower glycemic index than your white bread. And so with food with moderate to lower glycemic index are helpful for a diabetic and all, of us in controlling your blood glucose levels. So we basically want that. We do not want that huge spike or that huge increase. All right. We want a more a more smaller spike, especially when we talk about controlling your blood glucose levels. And so we want, and it kind of decreases your factors for heart disease and diabetes. And we can basically separate them into high, moderate, or low glycemic index. Another few factors that kind of examines, what kind of influences your glycemic response is the type of carbohydrate that you consume. Okay, and basically, if you're consuming high fiber food and everything like that, that's gonna lower down your glycemic index, your glycemic response. When we talk about the types of sugar and starch, all right, so again, we talk about simple sugars, those are going to cause a very high glycemic index, a rapid sugar spike. But your complex carbs, on the other hand, have a lower glycemic index. Also, presence of the type of starch, for example, your amylose and your amylopectins. So usually food which has a higher amylose content tend to have a lower GI. And so it has promotes a much more steadier blood sugar level. Where else, when we talk about presence of fat, protein, and fiber, they can also slow down your digestion and absorption of, carbohydrates. So they kind of, again, lower your GI. So they kind of stretch out your stomach, okay? So basically slow down your stomach emptying. And we talk about glycemic load, and glycemic load is actually really very important over here because glycemic load is a lot more accurate compared to your glycemic index because we take into consideration the quantity and also the quality, so the portion sizes. Usually we can calculate the glycemic load, but because it it's still a gen ed course. I don't want to make it too, I don't want to overcomplicate things. Just remember that if you're talking about glycemic index and glycemic load will be a lot more accurate because it takes into consideration the quantity and also the quality. You don't have to memorize this, but basically we kind of look into different types of food and how this, whether it's kind of low glycemic index, medium glycemic index, or high glycemic index. And again, I want you to kind of remember that, the goal is to understand the different impacts of different types of food. So if you have a food that's high glycemic index, it's going to cause that really huge blood sugar spike. And so that's why we want lower glycemic index because, it has a more gradual increase of that blood sugar spike, and it happens over that 2 to 3 hour period as compared to consuming a high GI food, particularly very important for patients who have diabetes. And so what are some of the physiological effects of, consuming a high glycemic index food? You see, apart from heart disease and elevation of LDL, I know we haven't gone through this triglycerides and lower density lipoprotein, but basically they're the ones that kind of, cause your heart disease. And so we also see, especially you're eating food that is high in glycemic index, you get hungry a lot more faster, also kinds of causes insulin resistance and also increases weight. And so when we talk about low glycemic index food, like food that's really high in fiber, basically it helps to lower your obesity, reduce blood glucose levels, reduce risk of cancer, heart disease, eye-related problems, macular degeneration, and also polycystic. So it's very, very important to kind of emphasize again that, low glycemic index food. And if we can go back to this previous slide, we can actually see that low glycemic index food, basically a lot of it is actually your, whole foods, your milk, your rice, okay, basmati rice, your apples, your fruits, okay, but high glycemic index, a lot of it is your heavily processed food. So with that, I will end here.